Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Out of Sight, a podcast show aiming to raise awareness about special needs and disabilities. We're exploring areas of inclusion and accessibility within our community. On today's episode, I'm your host Sarah Hamza, and with me is a very, very special guest, Dr. Amna Al Yassin. A bit of background to Dr. Amna Al Yassin. She is a GP with a special interest in child and adolescent mental health. In the UK, she works within Barnardo's, Brent CAMS, and primary care to reshape and redesign mental health services for young people. In Iraq, Amina is the Director of Mental Health and Wellbeing Programs for Al Ain, Iraq's largest orphan care charity. She is leading on the rollout of network of mental health clinics across the country, providing a much-needed infrastructure for mental health. She designed the CABTV program, which provides bespoke personal development, resilience, and mentoring interventions for bereaved children, and has achieved 85% success rate in returning school leavers for full-time education. She's an accredited trainer for children and Born to National Child Bereavement UK and the Youth Mental Health First Aid. So, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Amina.
Assalamu alaikum.
How are you doing?
I'm very good. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So why don't you just start off by telling us a little bit about your career and what you do?
Thank you. I mean, you've summarized it quite well in your introduction, but yeah, essentially I'm a GP with a special interest in child and adolescent mental health. I started off life as a medic in pediatrics, and then I slowly moved into general practice because I felt like it was going to give me so much more of an opportunity to connect with families, to have that sort of continuity of care, and to really look after the child and the family as a whole. I then started developing an interest in mental health. I always found that whenever I was seeing any cases, I was much more interested in the psychology and in the thinking and in the background to it all, much more than the physiology itself. And so I moved into mental health, and I've just been really lucky to have had some interesting opportunities to work in mental health, both in the UK, as you mentioned, with CAMS, and soon with Barnardo's, and also in Iraq, which is where so much of my real passion lies.
Wow. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your work in Iraq and what you do there specifically?
Absolutely. Okay. So in Iraq, I work with Al Ain Social Care Foundation, as you mentioned. Al Ain is Iraq's largest charity for the care of orphan children. The number is always increasing, but the last time I read it, they look after 86,000 orphan children and their mothers. And they look after them in what we call kinship-based care. So they're not in orphanages at all. They're all looked after by their extended families. But Al Ain provides them with financial support, healthcare, education, Eid and Ramadan packages, and interestingly to me, and to you, I am sure, mental health, psychological support, mentoring, and personal development. And so my role in Al Ain has been twofold. One has been with the Hikayati Center, which is this beautiful state-of-the-art center in Najaf, in which orphan children come. They spend a few weeks developing really, really crucial life skills. Like the skills that really make a difference. Like resilience and team working and problem solving, all the skills, the soft skills that we know actually make a difference to someone in their lives. And then after they finish the program, they're mentored long-term by one of the Hikayati staff members. And the other work I do with Al Ain is for their Anjum al-Zahira centers, so the Luminous Star centers. These are mental health clinics. There's one that's, a very large one in Baghdad, in Khalmiya, up and running, where they've seen over 1,400 cases so far, and they're able to offer talking therapies, CBT guided therapies, and they also have access to psychiatrists and physical health care team. So they're able to provide quite a good holistic package of care. And so I oversee that work too.
Wow, mashallah, you do so much, especially within the community, and I'm sure you come across so many different cases. I think it's so fascinating that you work in both here in the UK when it comes to mental health and with patients from different backgrounds, as well as, in Iraq as well. You see a variety of people presenting with mental health kind of problems or kind of conditions. What has been kind of the major difference that you noticed between people here in the UK versus in Iraq?
It's a really good question, and I think it's a question I'm asked quite often. I think one thing to say, Sarah, is, pain is pain and suffering is suffering, no matter where you are. And in some ways, a friend once told me this, and it stayed with me forever. She says, it doesn't matter if you drown in the bathtub or if you drown in an ocean, you've drowned, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, even though the circumstances are so different, suffering is suffering, pain is pain, and that's something that's instantly recognizable wherever you are. However, you are right in that there is such a huge difference in the services that are available, in how society views mental health. It's stigmatized wherever you are, but especially in Iraq, in the Middle East, in many other countries, it's more stigmatized. It's spoken about less. And so people often may be more hesitant to reach out for services. There may be less services for them to reach out to. Services may be very medicalized. There's a really medicalized model of how to access care. People feel quite, pathologized, or they feel quite stigmatized to go and access care when they need it. So there are differences. However, it all comes back to just innately being human and going through the roller coaster of life with all its ups and downs.
Yeah, I guess it's true. I've never thought of that analogy before, and it is really true. Everyone everywhere suffers in some way or form. And like, for example, if you think about the conditions that we want to mention, like depression or anxiety or even PTSD, they exist within all communities across the globe. But I think it's just interesting to see the different kind of presentations and how here there's greater access to healthcare. And so people, even though there is greater access to healthcare, people are still feeling like they can't present, or maybe they feel like there's a taboo to present. And I can only imagine how it is in Iraq, because it's probably a bit worse there as well. They might be presenting a bit later and such. As your work, as a GP, you probably see a lot of physical conditions too, as well as mental health conditions. How would you say the difference between people presenting with physical health conditions and mental health conditions? How would you say you see that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the interesting thing, and something that probably has surprised many people when I tell them it, is that GPs, probably on average, 40% of the patients that I see in any 1 week are presenting with a mental health problem.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
40%, that's
it's a huge percentage. I mean, I remember during the COVID lockdown, when we were working, I'd say during then, anxiety was one of the things that people were calling their GPs about most. Wow. So you would have thought that people are calling about coughs and breathlessness and COVID concerns. That was happening, but that was much less than the number of people that were calling through about anxiety, loneliness, isolation, mental health difficulties. For many people, the GP is the most accessible professional, if you think about it. And so you do get a really large number of mental health concerns. The other interesting thing is I don't really see it as these two different things, like physical health and mental health. They're so related. And I think any attempt to separate them is sort of false. So to give a minor example that many of us will have experienced, if the day before an exam, the day before a driving test, you may have really severe tummy pains, really severe headaches, lots and lots of physical symptoms. So we know that there's definitely this connection between your mind and your body, and it goes deeper than that for many things. So lots of medical conditions, physical health conditions, will have mental health implications. For example, having a very low thyroid may make you feel very tired. It may also make you feel very depressed. Similarly, if you flip it the other way, lots of mental health conditions have physical presentations. So in children, anxiety quite often comes up as headaches and tummy aches. So they're really related. And I think part of being a GP is being able to look at the person as a whole, I don't see someone as a kidney or as a
Yeah.
brain or as an eye or, you
Yeah.
know, you see them as a whole, and you're very aware that that means their physical body, their mind, but also the society and the family and the conditions they live in. It's all a big, lovely mess.
Yeah.
And that's what makes us human.
Yeah.
And, you know, it all affects each other.
Oh, yeah, I think that's really nice the way you put it, because it is very true how sometimes our mental health can present in physical manifestations. So, like you said, who doesn't get a stomach kind of pain before an exam, or sometimes we need to go to the bathroom a bit more often, or like, for example, a headache. But how does someone then notice or draw the line of, oh, this is a mental health condition I need to address, versus this is a physical health condition I need to kind of control or kind of help myself or, self-medicate for?
That's a really good question. If I just slightly reframe that question. So with mental health, as we said, we've all felt anxiety before an exam or before a driving test or before maybe traveling.
Yeah.
How do you know when that's the type of anxiety that means you need to get help?
Yeah.
Or we've all had low mood, or we've all experienced bereavement and then, you know, felt very down after that. Where do you draw the line between this is a normal part of the human experience and between it's time for me to get help?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say that it all depends on how long this has gone on for. So in general, I don't like giving strict rules, but in general, anything that goes on for more than 2 weeks, it's a good time to get checked out. Another one is if it's starting to affect your functioning, you know, if it's starting to affect your work, your relationships, your ability to, do your schoolwork or your university work, that's also another sign. And also if there are any of what we call, you know, the more severe or red flag signs. So for example, if you're ever having any thoughts about self-harm or ending your life, or if you're hearing voices, or if, you know, you're really feeling unable to manage, or if people who love you and know you really well are starting to get really worried, these are all times to get help. But one important thing, in the same way that I wouldn't expect my patient to be able to tell the difference, let's say, between a heart attack and muscular chest pain, and I, as their doctor, would be more than happy for them to contact me about that and for me to work it out, that applies to mental health too. You're not sure if this is just stress or if this is something more. You're not sure if this is just a normal bereavement process or something more. Contact your doctor. That's their job. And they'll do that work for you. That's why they've been to medical school and had lots of training, you know? Never suffer alone. There are people out there who can help. Let them do it for you.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. And I guess this is something for viewers and listeners to hear, and then say that there are, you know, sometimes GPs get a bad rep, and people feel like they can't speak to their GP, or, you know, with the whole stress of the NHS, and there's lots of backlog, and sometimes people don't get appointments. But it's important for people to know that the GP is the most accessible, possibly, doctor within the NHS, and that they will always be, available for an appointment.
The GP is the front door of the entire NHS, and I know that GPs get a bad rep. And I also know that this show isn't about defending GPs.
Yeah.
However, it is important to know that GPs actually manage over 80% of patient contacts in the NHS for less than 10% of the NHS budget.
Wow.
And, you know, GPs have it's an immensely difficult job. I've got 4 jobs at the moment.
Wow.
And the GP job is the hardest, you know. It's a job where you're expected to work at speed, with accuracy and compassion. And that's not always easy. But for you for any patient, then yes, your GP is often your first port of call. And, you know, if you're unhappy at anything, just ask to speak to someone else. And there are lots of ways to contact them, you know, be it telephone consultation, a face-to-face consultation, or even an electronic consultation on the website. There are lots of ways to get help. And if you're having trouble navigating this system, this complex healthcare system, then your GP can help with that.
Inshallah, thank you. So I mentioned a little bit in your bio, and you mentioned yourself that you work with CAMS. So CAMS is a mental health service for children and adolescents, essentially the youth. And you probably come across a lot of different types of patients. You come across maybe patients with learning difficulties or adolescents experiencing depression, anxiety, self-harm. You see kind of the whole shebang, like we say. How different is CAMS to, let's say, your regular GP service, or what are the kind of presentations that you see in CAMS?
Good question. So as you just said, CAMS stands for Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. It's a specialist service, right? So it's like what we call, it's not primary care, GP, your frontline services. It's a secondary care specialized service. And so most children, the vast majority of children who have some mental health concerns or mental health difficulties will not need to be seen by CAMS. CAMS, their real remit and their real strength and where they provide best value is at the more severe, moderate to severe end of the spectrum, right? So we're talking about children who may have disorders like psychosis, children where there is extreme self-harm, children who are having depression, anxiety that's needing medication, children with suicidal thoughts. You know, this happens to children as well. And that's where CAMS' real strength and real remit lies. As for children, many children we know, who are suffering with anxiety or low mood or difficulties adjusting to life, like difficulties adjusting to a new school or to a bereavement or to a divorce, there are other mental health services or other services that may be more suited to them. So one of them is schools. Children spend most of their waking hours at schools, and many, many schools now will have in-house counseling, or they will have a mental health link worker who is based in this school but is also linked to CAMS and can get advice from there. Or there are well-being support teams in the local authorities and local councils which, again, work with schools. So CAMS is, a fantastic service. Again, a very service that is in high demand, but its real remit lies in dealing with the more moderate to severe end of the spectrum. And for everyone else, there are lots of other services available. Community services, your GP, and school-based services.
Sure. In your experience working in CAMS, and specifically with patients with learning difficulties, what has been something that you've noticed about them presenting to, let's say, the GP for physical health conditions, or even presenting to CAMS themselves?
Yeah, good question. I think let's start off with a few definitions.
Okay.
So, a learning difficulty is like a specific issue or difficulty with a particular aspect of learning. So something like dyslexia, let's say. And then you've got a learning, but it may affect your ability to learn or a specific aspect of learning, but it doesn't affect your overall intelligence, your overall IQ. Then you've got learning disabilities. A learning disability it's something that affects your overall IQ, your overall intelligence, and it's something that's usually lifelong, and it would usually also have implications for how well you are able to manage your activities of daily living, how you are able to cope with home, school, your shopping, etc. So people with learning difficulties, people with learning disabilities may or may not have a mental health difficulty as well, right? So in general, people with learning disabilities do have more mental health difficulties than the general population, and that's something that we can talk about. But yeah, if they do have mental health difficulties, then of course CAMS is a good place for them. That's going to be useful for them. But if not, then again, the most and the best support is going to be coming from their educational settings and from schools.
Nice. Thank you. So let's say, for example, children with autism or ADHD, or other kind of neurodivergent kind of conditions. I'm sure you see quite a bit in CAMS, would you say, or more in the GP setting?
In CAMS, again, yeah, CAMS their role is in the diagnosis of these conditions. So for a child to receive a diagnosis of autism or ADHD, they would be referred to CAMS to have those assessments done. But then in general, after that, they're looked after by their GPs and by schools and by their families, unless any specific concerns come up.
And I think we spoke a little bit about this before the show, but I think you mentioned that when in your work as a GP, you saw that specifically with individuals, let's say with special needs or learning difficulties or even learning disabilities, they present differently with their kind of physical health or their health in general. So if they're having a problem, how would you say, how different is that to a neurotypical child in your experience?
Yeah. So let's, for ease and so that we don't get all tongue twisted, let's just say people with additional needs, whatever category specifically they fall into. In general, what we find is that people with additional needs do tend to have more physical health care problems too, okay? There is evidence to suggest that people with learning disabilities actually end up having a shorter life expectancy than others. And that's not for any physical reason. So it's worth digging in to think why, okay? It's because there are lots of reasons for this, but one of the reasons is thought to be that they have more difficulty accessing medical health care when needed. So if you think of someone who may have, additional needs, may have trouble communicating, who may find it difficult to navigate the healthcare system, to make an appointment, or who may have difficulty communicating the symptoms that they're experiencing in their body, understanding all the jargon that's sometimes used, that's going to be creating obstacles in the way of getting to healthcare. So that's one issue. There are other issues too, which are really very much on us as the medical profession. So for example, there's something called diagnostic overshadowing. And what that means is that let's say someone with a particular a particular additional need comes to you with a symptom. There is this bias that goes on whereby you think that the symptom is because of their additional need, like that you ignore that it may actually be a new physical healthcare problem. And then there's other factors too. People are looking into could there be genetic elements? Could there be something specifically about the condition that leads to other physical problems? For example, there's this correlation between autism and having lots of gut issues like gastrointestinal issues. That's again not completely understood. It's a pattern that's been observed and it needs to be researched more. So there are definitely lots of different reasons why people with additional needs sometimes have additional physical healthcare needs too. And I think this is worth digging into because there is so much that we can do as their families and as their healthcare professionals to try and make it all a bit fairer and a lot more inclusive and accessible for them.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what we can actually do? So as parents, what can they do to kind of help or minimize that barrier that their child may have to access healthcare in their case?
Absolutely, yeah. So, for example, one big thing I'm going to say is it sounds a bit scary, me saying, people with additional needs have, additional physical healthcare needs, or sometimes that can even affect life expectancy. But this is important because knowledge is power. And knowing this is going to mean that as a parent, as a family member, as a friend, you're going to be able to advocate for them on their behalf, Make sure that if they do have a symptom or a concern, that it's not ignored, it's not brushed under the carpet, it's taken seriously, investigated, just as, it would be in anyone else. And then there are some really specific things that are helpful and really worth, I think, our viewers knowing about. So one of them is every GP surgery needs to keep a register of everybody in the surgery who's got a learning disability, okay? And then if you are on this register once a year, you should be proactively contacted by the surgery for a full health review where they ask you questions from top to toe, mental health, physical health. They check that, your blood tests if needed are up to date, if any other tests are needed. This is for everyone with a learning disability aged 14 plus, okay? It's really proactive, and it's been put in place by the NHS to try and mitigate for everything I've said before, which is that we know that sometimes people end up being treated unequally. So this has been put in place. So if you or anyone in your family falls under this category, make sure that you are on that register and that you're getting that annual health check. Another example I came across recently is MenCap, which is a fantastic support organization and charity for people with learning disabilities. And they have a fantastic form on their website. It's easy read, which means that, the words are slightly simpler. There are pictures there too. A full letter which you can send to your doctor telling them how they could serve you better. So for example, my dear GP, I would like you to give me a longer appointment if necessary. I would always like this person to be with me. I would like a summary of my consultation to be sent to me afterwards so that I can read it. Lots of little adaptations like that. And don't forget, if you need that, because that's going to give you an equal level of healthcare to anyone else, then that's your right. You deserve that.
Yeah.
And ask for it. So those are things that families could do.
Yeah, I guess it's all the whole aspect of advocating for your own care sometimes. So it's unfortunate that sometimes the system doesn't help, even though you did mention that yearly checkup appointment, which I didn't know about, which is quite interesting, and it's very important.
Very important.
And it's very important that GPs are proactively trying to mitigate, like you said, for the unfortunate statistics that exist, and the barrier where people aren't presenting when they should have, or they should. But I forgot what I was going to say then. But it's okay. I think what I was just trying to say is it is really important to be proactive
and to advocate for yourself. Yeah. It's like anything else. Let's say you're going to the bank to get a new mortgage. If you go in and just ask them what they have available, you will end up only receiving the information they give you. However, if you've researched it a little bit yourself, you've got a bit of know-how, you've spoken to someone, you're obviously going to go in a stronger position.
Yeah, you're going to feel empowered.
Yeah, and so I think it's always, for any of us, the more we learn about our health, the more we learn about our mental health, the more we learn about our healthcare rights, the more that we're going to be able to, advocate for ourselves and get the best care needed. But especially, I think, when you've got an additional need, and I know that this speaks for so many of the families that I know, they do sometimes feel like they do need to put up, just bring in their advocacy and put up a fight sometimes to get the care they need. And that's so unfair, and it shouldn't be happening. But until you get what you need, and until you get what you feel your child or your family member needs, then of course that's something that you're going to have to do.
Especially when it comes to, let's say, for example, mental health conditions where it can be so debilitating and it can be so, ignored because not everyone can see what you're going through. And so, whereas, for example, if you break your leg, everyone's like, yeah, you broke your leg. Do you need any help? How can I help you? How can I make this easier for you? But if you say, oh, I'm depressed, or I can't get out of bed, or I'm really anxious to go to this place and that place, a lot of people won't be able to see through that. And it's so debilitating that you yourself sometimes feel like you need someone to help you or to advocate for you, which is what the system is kind of trying to be there for you, but it can be a little bit better, I think.
Yeah, definitely. There are lots of improvements that can be made. Lots of hospitals, for example, have learning disability nurses, which means that anyone who's admitted who has a learning disability or has an operation that's coming up, then those nurses will be available to support and to try and make that all as smooth and, supportive an experience as possible. lots is being done. And, I recently heard that there are also currently thoughts or campaigns about everyone with autism also being offered an annual health check as well. That's not yet in place, but it's one of the things that is being discussed. So there's definitely a lot of will and, a lot of lots of plans to make things better. And I am very hopeful that they will be better.
Inshallah.
But until we get there, then of course, advocating for ourselves and, educating ourselves and empowering ourselves is going to be important.
Yeah, and I guess that's the whole point of a show like this, where
Absolutely.
we just talk about what services are available for people, because a lot of the time, sometimes people don't know the services even exist.
Yeah.
So sometimes really important just talk about and be like, this exists, and you can reach out if you need to. I'm sure that within your work as a GP, and especially with a GP with special interest in mental health, you see a lot of carers. So you see a lot of individuals that have present maybe with mental health conditions, or just present with the impact of caring for someone that has a disability, because that in itself can be difficult.
Absolutely.
And sometimes is overlooked.
Absolutely.
What can you tell us a little bit about that?
What can I tell you about that? I am in awe of carers, like you just think about how difficult it is to have a 9-to-5 job looking after others. And now think of all the carers out there who are doing this 24 hours a day. So absolutely in awe of carers. And undoubtedly it takes its toll, It takes its toll on you in terms of exhaustion and fatigue and, your own mental health. And it can also take its toll on you physically, heavy lifting at times, having to, adjust to different sleep routines. So being a carer is one of the toughest jobs. And again, I think, do not underestimate how important it is to look after your own health and your own mental health when looking after someone else. You can only ever pour from a cup that's full. If your own cup is empty, how are you going to be providing for someone else? And so, again, with carers, there are lots of different things that are available. So, for example, in the local area where I work in Brent, there's Brent Carers Centre. And they will have regular coffee mornings, meetups for carers, which are nice because you get to connect with others who understand you. But it's also important because they link you into all the services that are available. Are you getting the benefits that you're entitled to? Are you getting the social services support that you may be entitled to? Do you know that there's respite care that you may be able to get a few hours a week off or a few days a year off so that you are able to have a rest? There's so much out there. And it usually always starts with connecting with other people who are in a similar situation and plugging yourself into those support organizations.
Yeah. And I guess you've spoken about this in the past, where it's how important it is for people to get involved in support groups, to be involved with people where they can share common experiences, to support one another. Because I think in what I believe is, it's really dangerous when people think that they're the only person suffering, or that they're the only person that can feel a certain way. When you hear other people's stories and you think, actually, I'm not the only one. And, we can help one another because we feel one another and we hear one another. And you've spoken about this before, I know for sure, about the importance of support groups and support networks.
I really do think support groups are such a blessing, and they're actually a really underused blessing, especially in our communities. For almost any condition you can think of, even very rare, conditions, there will be support groups that can be found if you search online, or if you speak to the social prescriber at your local surgery. And these support groups are completely invaluable. Not only do you network with others who are going through the same, not only do you feel like, oh goodness, it's not just me in the world, but there is so much that you can only learn from someone else who has been through something, Like as a doctor, I can talk to you about the diagnostic criteria for ADHD. I can talk to you about the medications that are used, but can I honestly tell you, speaking of any experience, about what to do when it's the third night in a row that your child hasn't slept and you're completely exhausted, or, you know, how best to navigate the education system and get your child the support they need. I don't know that. The best person who's going to know that is someone else, you know, another family who have been through it, who have done it before, you know. And so absolutely learn from that and, you know, take all the support that's available out there. I was so pleased to see that recently in our community there was a support group run for people with multiple sclerosis in one of our Islamic centers.
Yeah.
Amazing. You know, this is what we need. When you are connected to others, you suddenly realize you're not alone, and you suddenly realize how much power there is in, you know, in numbers.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I really like how you brought us to that point, because I was just going to ask you, what is the importance in the community in supporting, you know, individuals with additional needs, individuals with disabilities, even families of individuals with disabilities, like carers, parents, siblings, because all those people suffer from in a certain aspect that maybe others don't, and the community plays a very crucial role in being an institution they can look towards. What is your opinion on kind of the community and the collective supporting one another?
You know, they say like it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
Okay. So now imagine if this is a child who's got additional needs, who may, you know, need a lot more care than someone else, whose parents may have never experienced going through this before. How important is that village? You know, these children are all of our children. You know, that community spirit that we had, that, you know, in many places has been lost, is so, so important. In terms of what we need, like what could our communities do? What can our centers do? What can our organizations do? The honest truth is, this answer is best answered by the families and by the experts themselves. And by experts, I do not mean doctors. I mean experts through lived experience. You know, people who are the ones who are behind this. So we need to hear their voices. We need to know what works for them. And then we need to really take this on board. And we need to realize something, which is when I make my mosque or my organization or my home more inclusive, I'm not doing anyone else a favor. I'm doing myself a favor, you know, because there is so much to learn. There is so much joy to have in being together. There is so much that I can grow as an individual by being surrounded by diversity and by being surrounded by all sorts of people. And I lose out on that if I don't include everyone, you know? If wheelchair users, for example, can't access my mosque, can you imagine how much talent, how much leadership, how many ideas we don't hear because they're not able to be there with us? Or if, you know, our centers were not suitable for children with additional needs and their mothers and the families ended up not coming, then we've just lost a couple of generations of children from being included in our centers. And that's why this diversity, there's been a lot of interest in diversity recently. And, you know, it all started off when there was no diversity.
Yeah.
And then we started wanting diversity so that we would look like we were doing the right thing. Yeah. And now there is suddenly this realization that diversity benefits everyone. And I really think our communities would do well to, you know, learn from that.
Yeah.
And to work out exactly what's helpful, we need to use the communities themselves. Can I give you an example?
Yeah, go on.
So I was at a recent conference where it was, you know, it was incredibly inclusive. And they were very also open and visible about wanting to be inclusive. And so many families did come. And my daughter in the creche ended up meeting a child with additional needs. And then when she came home, she was asking me about it. And we had a really, really wonderful conversation. We were able to learn. I was able to talk to her lots. And we had a fantastic conversation. And then it was about 2 weeks later that she went to another program where there was, again, another child with additional needs, but who wasn't really being catered for as well. And who, some of the other children in the audience were staring at and, not treating appropriately. And she actually spoke up and,
Wow.
went to that child's, made sure that they felt included and supported. So who's benefited in that story? My daughter,
Yeah.
me. We have grown as individuals. We have learned. We have become kinder. We have become more empathetic. We have become more, inclusive because we managed to meet and to mingle with others. And so,
Yeah.
I think that, whenever I really, really do believe that diversity benefits us all and we could really benefit from it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think there's so much importance in making our communities a more accessible and more inclusive space, because we learn from individuals that have a different perspective to us, whether that be someone with additional needs or disability or not. We just learn from one another, and that's just how life works, I guess.
Absolutely.
And even being from the Islamic communities we're both from, Islam itself teaches us to be more inclusive and to learn from one another. And it was designed that we were one ummah and one collection of people, to get to know one another, to speak to one another, to network with one another, because that's how humanity works. And I think the story you mentioned with your daughter is such an important story, and I think it's so inspiring. Firstly, your daughter, mashallah, bless her. And we need more people like your daughter out in the world.
No, we need more people like that child in the conference out in the world, because it was through him being there, being himself, and being accepted that she learnt, that we learnt, that he was included. And that's why we need everyone out in the world, because this is what our, this is what our humanity looks like. And we need to embrace that.
And it starts from the younger generations as well.
Absolutely.
And the more we kind of push, the more change we see within our communities, it's starting from the younger generations. And it makes me wonder that if your daughter was able to accept and actually be very intrigued and be open to asking questions about her new friend in the creche, and the fact that she was able to go to another place 2 weeks later and stand up for an individual that she had seen and made friends with, makes me wonder, where did the taboo or stigma or the shame of disability and additional needs even come from?
Where did it come from? I don't know. But I know that I have been in societies, I have been in houses where people who are disabled or who are different are still kept away, kept away from others. And we never know the tiniest of our actions and what kind of impact that may have had. We never know how that mother may have once gone out and may have heard something hurtful from someone else, and that may have put her off ever taking her child out again. Or, taking someone in a wheelchair, for example, out to the mosque may have been such a mission, such a physical effort, and so inaccessible that you never wanted to do it again. I don't know where it originally came from. But what I do know is that we have all been created by Allah. And I really love this idea that, Allah created each and every one of us individually. And Allah doesn't make mistakes, Allah created each of us purposefully for a reason. And none of us were created to be hidden away. None of us. Yeah.
I think that's so beautiful. And sometimes you hear people say, or that, for example, with mental health conditions, don't be sad, Allah's here, or you can't be depressed, or if you're anxious, it's because you haven't prayed enough, but actually, like you said, Allah created us perfect, but He also created science, He also created, medicine for us to reach out to and to help, to ask for help. And sometimes there's this whole idea, and I think it sometimes comes from shame or taboo, that mental health is something that contradicts Islam, when it's not really the case. Have you ever had an experience where someone's like, oh, no, I don't need medication, or I don't need therapy, I just need to pray more?
Thankfully, I think the tide is turning slightly, and, we're starting to understand this all a little bit more. Yes, that is something that you hear, and there is a lot of stigma attached to mental health in the same way that it's not attached to physical health. You would never have anyone feeling ashamed of having heart disease or Crohn's disease or any other physical healthcare condition. But when it comes to mental health, it's suddenly, it does feel very stigmatizing and shameful sometimes. And there's no reason for it to be that way. It's a difficulty like anything else. It has treatments, and some of those include medication, some of those include therapy, some of them are things that you can do. But it has treatments like anything else. And we have been given this, this body and this mind by Allah, and it's our responsibility to look after it. And so, of course, by all means, pray. By all means, do your du'as. By all means, continue your salah and your Quran. But understand that this is a condition which has biological as well as psychological and social aspects. And if there's a treatment out there that's going to help you, it's your responsibility to take it.
Yeah.
And what you were saying in the beginning about like, don't be sad, don't be, that's so invalidating, right? Like no one ever got better by someone telling them not to be sad. No one ever calmed down by someone telling them to calm down. No, this is something that's always been of pain to me. No mother ever has felt calmed down and reassured after her miscarriage by someone telling her, you can get pregnant again. That pain is real, and the first step to healing pain is accepting it and allowing the person to feel it, and then carrying and then helping them through, or allowing them to help themselves through. It's never, ever healed by asking the person just to pull their socks up and carry on.
Wow, I think that's so, I think it's very deep when you think about it like that, because it's so easy for the other person who's not in the scenario, not in that person's shoes, to say, get over yourself or get over it. It's really easy. And it's comments like that that can have a massive impact. And I think it's like you mentioned about, where did the whole taboo come from? Where does shame come from? It's because people might have said something along those lines, and then individuals have not felt like other people can relate. So they felt to just stay home or just stay away, which is the complete opposite of what progress looks like. And like you mentioned, it takes one comment, takes one statement. And I know sometimes it's difficult in passing, and, but especially in our communities, I think there's so much progress to be made about comments or about making people feel welcomed. I know that we've spoken about on the show before where, for example, majalis for Imam al-Hussein, where parents don't feel like they can bring their children because their children are too loud, or children with ADHD, or children with autism spectrum disorder, and then they miss out. And
you know what? It's not your majlis. It's Imam Hussein's majlis, And so who has the right to exclude anyone from it? Who has the right to exclude anyone from it? Nobody. And, I think that what you're saying is important. There's so much value in the words we speak, and a word spoken, you can never take it back. And there's so much to say for speaking words that are truthful, that are kind, and that are necessary. And if you don't know what to say, say nothing at all. If you don't know what to say nothing at all. And whenever you are in a position to be kind or to show up for someone, do it. So a mother has bravely brought her child into a majlis, and that child's, making noise or she's starting to feel a bit uncomfortable. You're there. You be her ally. Turn around and be like, this is your majlis. You stay here. You have no idea how many other people in that majlis may be inspired by you to bring their children next time. We know. Through my own experience of being a child, I think you learn more in a majlis from the atmosphere and the environment and just feeling loved and feeling that community sense more than necessarily each word by word. So yeah, if you've missed out on 2 words in the lecture because a child's been noisy, but if that has meant that that child has, for the first time, experienced that environment and experienced the love of Ahlulbayt in the community, then that's a win.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure. Yeah, and it's so important, like you said, for everyone just to be a little bit kinder and to understand. I think, like you mentioned, knowledge is power, but understanding and accepting and just thinking. We have this in Islam as well, as give your brother 70 excuses before you judge them. And it's the same kind of thing with when you see people in the community, is before you judge. So we had a mother on the show who said that a lot of people, so her son had autism and ADHD, and a lot of people used to say it's because maybe he's got bad parenting, instead of like actually knowing that the child might be misbehaving just because he's excited, or because he doesn't like to sit still. And so our role in the community sometimes is just to be a little bit more understanding and to be a bit more kind of, it's okay, rather than to be like, oh no, this child is so bad, or this child is misbehaving.
You know, I genuinely had a visceral reaction to that. Like, for someone to already be struggling with, be it their own child's behavior, their own child's diagnosis, or anything, and for someone to come and to make them feel worse in that moment is a new level, And as I said, let's just take it as a rule. Either say something kind, true, and useful, or just, smile, nod, and say nothing at all. I've been, I mentioned the miscarriage story before, but yeah, I've lost count of the number of times when I have heard people make throwaway comments like, you can always have another baby. Oh, come on, at least, it happened now, not when they're older. Or, whatever those words are that may to us sound like, I don't know, maybe someone thought that was a useful thing to say, but it's not. And we need to be so careful about adding pain to someone who's already in pain. And the best way we can learn what to say is to ask people and to educate ourselves and to read up and to really think, what would I want to hear in that situation? What would I want to hear in that situation? And I want to, sounds like we're being quite negative, but definitely we have made lots of progress.
100%, yeah.
The fact that, mental health talks and events are happening so commonly, alhamdulillah, in our community at the moment, definitely steps in the right direction. But, the Prophet was sent to perfect our akhlaq, and we all need to continue striving, myself included, until we reach a level where we feel that, he would be proud of how we are treating each other.
Yeah. Inshallah. That was really nice to hear, honestly. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of the show, and I know there's so many good points that were raised today in the episode. But what would you like to leave us with? What would be your parting advice to parents, individuals, community members, patients? Your choice.
Wow, that's a big one, isn't it? I would say that remember, whatever it may be that you're going through, that you're not going to be alone, to reach out for any help that you feel you may need. There are services there are support groups, there are other people who, are going through what you are going through, and you deserve all the help you can get. You deserve to give yourself the best chance, be it for recovery, or you deserve to give yourself the best chance to get support and education and healthcare for your family members who may have additional needs. You deserve this as much as anybody else, and it's all out there for you to get. And, again, I would say that for everyone in our community who is doing such a fabulous job, remember that we are one ummah, we are one body, and if any part of us is hurting, the rest of us is hurting. And so we need to always check how we are treating others. You always judge a society by how it treats its weakest members, or you always judge a society by how it treats the people in the society who need the most help. And I know that there's so much that we can do to help. And let's start by listening to the families and listening to the people, because they are the experts in this. And as they always say, no decisions about me without me. Thank you.
Amazing. Honestly, golden advice. And thank you so much, Dr. Amina, for being an amazing, amazing guest. And inshallah, the listeners and the viewers have been able to learn something from this episode, because we've spoken so much about different aspects of individuals with additional needs, special needs, disabilities. You've signposted so much. So inshallah, if you want to rewatch this, you will watch it on YouTube and go back to all the different services that are available for everyone. And there is definitely barriers to accessing healthcare, but we're getting better.
Yeah.
And you've shown us throughout this episode where we can do and where we can kind of access that healthcare too. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. And, thank you for raising awareness about these important subjects. And, inshallah, these subjects will no longer be out of sight.
Inshallah. Thank you very much. And inshallah, we'll see the viewers and the listeners in the next episode on Out of Sight next week, inshallah. Thank you. Ma'as salama.